Welcome to the podcast series, Us and Them, brought to you by Heidelberg University's Graduate School for Humanities and Social Sciences. Tune in for thought-provoking interviews with experts in different fields, from the social sciences to the humanities, from law to economics. Welcome to the podcast series, Us and Them. Today, we will explore the intersection of two important fields, economics and environmental policy. Our goal is to better understand how sustainability management and applied economics come together in areas such as business model innovation, the circular economy, green innovation, and climate change, all viewed through a strong regional and territorial perspective. To help us navigate these complex and highly relevant topics, we are pleased to welcome a distinguished guest to our studio, Dr. Federico Zilia, from Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the University of Milan, Italy, and also contributing professor in the 4EU Plus program, Collegio Futuro, Interdisciplinary College for Doctoral Students 2026. So, welcome, Professor, to our studio.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sinan, for this amazing opportunity to be here. It's my first time in Heidelberg, so I'm very happy to be here also to prepare and present this podcast with you. Hello also to our listener. My name is Federico Zilia. I come from University of Milan in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in this department. My work's experience across the environmental economics and in particular the impact of weather shock on economic outcomes like, for example, labor market, business model, sustainable business model. So I have a multidisciplinary approach because my department is a multidisciplinary department in which they collaborate several professors with several topic and background. For example, I belong to an economic field, but then we have a chemistry professor, biologist professor. So also probably we have the opportunity during this podcast to present some research, and you will see how interconnected these topics are together. And then, I'm very happy to be here. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor. We are going to talk about the topic of environmental economics, circular economy, green innovation, and economic impacts of weather shocks, actually. And in order to understand this topic, maybe we should first mention about the intersection of economics and environmental science, which are the components of environmental economics, actually. So I'd like to ask you first, what should we understand by this intersection of economics and environmental science, and specifically environmental economics within the framework of your research, and what kind of questions are you aiming to raise and answer in this field?
Sinan, I tell you a story. This is the story in which I started my PhD. Probably you are familiar in which when you see the television or you read a newspaper, you see how climate change impact on several dimensions, but especially on drought, floods, heat waves, damages for social community, human health. Less is known in the mass media, maybe more in the literature, but less is known in the mass media about the economic consequence deriving from climate change. In terms of value, the profit losses for company if there is a heat waves on extreme weather events. So starting from this idea, environmental economics is when you take into consideration all these aspects, you try to quantify numerically this impact, this risk, also to prevent possible future risk. So it is important also to use two important words, adaptation and mitigation. And our goal is to provide some lines that can be useful for community, institution, policymakers to define specific guidelines to prevent these extreme weather events or other external factors. Some question that we can every day try to answer. How can companies reuse waste to produce something new? So we know that there is a waste generation problems following an increase in population, an increase in needs. And if we are able to provide some additional model to use waste to produce new eco-friendly product, of course, we can create an environmental benefits for our society. Or, for example, how climate change can impact on the labor market, because I believe there are some workers that experience more affected condition by climate change. Look, imagine about the workers that usually work in a farm during summer, hot summer, is totally different to work in a services sector. So it is important to quantify the damages also for these people. And also we evaluate the policy tool proposed by the European Commission, like, for example, geographical indication. Probably we have the opportunity later to go deeper into detail about this topic, but geographical indication are a tool that was conceived in 1992, so in the past, in another context, in another scenario, where the climate change probably are not so diffuse in the community, in the general speaking for people. Now it's totally different. So how can that old instrument be applied now facing the real world, the real needs? So we try to go deeper into detail about this topic and this question.
I totally understand that actually your field is really loaded with the policy implications, and also policy recommendations will also come in this framework in our podcast episode. And I'd like to also continue with the aspect of geographical indications, because you published an article in 2021 in the MDPI journal Sustainability titled From Waste to Product, Circular Economy Applications from Sea Urchin, which discusses a circular economy approach focused on developing a sustainable business model by transforming sea urchin waste into new environmentally friendly products or practical applications. That was a really long description, but it's also really important to understand the importance of circular economy in this framework. And also, there is another article you have published titled Case Study of Life Cycle Assessment and Sustainable Business Model for Sea Urchin Waste in the Journal of Cleaner Environmental Systems in 2023. So there were a lot of informations there, and maybe to understand first how actually sea urchins play a great role in the environmental policy and also circular economy, I'd like first to ask, could you explain more about the circular economy and what should we understand under this term?
Yeah, okay. I starting about this research because I'm quite linked with this topic because it's my first topic that I addressed after my master degree in environmental and food economics. I had the opportunity to continue my master thesis, working on sea urchin waste. So I spent my first year thanks to a project founded by Cariplo Foundation, that is an Italian foundation that support university to study the reuse of waste in a circular economic perspective. So the two articles that you mentioned are also a personal satisfaction because I put a lot of efforts to do this. The point is that we know that for decades we experience a linear economy model in which you use raw materials, you transform raw materials to produce your product, and then after the consumption of the product, this product finish in the disposal or landfill. This process was not sustainable, also for the increasing in the citizen, the population, the limited raw materials resources. So in 20 years ago, more or less, different countries in Europe, but also all over the world, are trying to apply the recycling model. So to split waste into different categories like plastic, organic, and so on. Unfortunately, this process 10 years ago was not sufficient to consider the waste generation accumulation and also the problem that we also are familiar. So we are working on circular economy. Circular economy is not a new concept. We try to apply circular economy starting from 15, 20 years more or less, but this concept belongs to different authors in 1980. Pierce and Turner talk about circular economy at the beginning, then also Kenneth Boulding, but now are very relevant from also a company point of view. So the logic is that when we obtain a waste, we reduce this waste to recreate another cycle. So not to use raw materials, but to use a secondary waste to produce something new as many times as possible. It's a sort of cascade effect. Of course, there is a main limitation behind the circular economy. There is some constraint because when you convert waste into something new, of course, you need additional energy, you need additional workforce, water use, and so on. So this is known in the literature speaking as the entropy law. Is a sort of paradox because you have to consume something more to reuse waste. But until now is probably the best solution as possible that we can apply circular economy. If our listeners are intention to go deeper into detail, I suggest you to visit the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that is probably the most recognized institution all over the world that provide every year a different definition about circular economy. Because circular economy can change step by step depending on the challenges and the issue that the real world experience, and it is based also on the 9R principle. The 9R principle are the way in which we can consume, like a consumer perspective, but also producer from the company point of view. For example, recycling. Okay, we are familiar with the recycling. We know that it is the less favorable option because recycling is not enough. Then we have other strategy like, for example, redesign. When you create a product, it's not necessary to put in that product thousands of kilos of materials. It's not enough. We have to redesign the product only for the scope, for the goal, to avoid additional material, to avoid raw materials that are not necessary for that function. Or, for example, we have sharing, like, for example, car sharing is an example in which there can be create an holistic approach in which you use as a single consumer that car, but also you, Sinan, you can reuse as many times you can. And finally, the most favorable option is the 9th R, that is the refuse, in two directions. The first one is from a consumer point of view. If you have a similar product, you try to avoid to buy this one because you have at home the comparison product or services. And from a company point of view, this is important. You have to avoid to put in the market something similar because first, from economic perspective, it's not convenient. Second, obviously, you have to diversify. If you are able to diversify, you can get what we are known as competitive advantages. And if you have a competitive advantages, you are able to get the needs of a specific consumer target. In that case, your target, your consumer, decide to buy your product instead of another product because you are able to put some features, some characteristic inside that other competitors are not able. So this is the logic behind the circular economy. Coming back to the sea urchin waste, Searching waste, it is important because it is a niche product with a niche market. The quantity collected is very low all over the world. The most important market are a Chilean market, Asian, and a little bit in Mediterranean area, especially in Italy, in Sardinia and Sicily area. It is a quite seasonal product because you eat, for example, in Italy during summer with a spaghetti. But I don't know, have you ever eaten a sea urchin, Sinan?
Actually, I don't remember it, but in my first chance, I will also try it, of course.
I ask you this question because if you are familiar with sea urchin, you know that you can eat only the eggs of sea urchin, the gonads of sea urchin, but 80% of sea urchin is waste, is composed by skeleton, test, and so on. So the problem is our project held by University of Milan is, what about if we are able to reuse sea urchin waste to produce something new? There are two directions. The first one is a biomedical application because deriving from sea urchin, it is possible to extract marine collagen. Marine collagen is able to produce skin regeneration, for example, or, for example, pharmaceutical products for beauty products, cosmetic, and so on. The second approach that we investigate in these two articles that we publish is grinding the sea urchin to obtain a powder. This powder can be used as a feed supplement for line hens, because hens, when produce a lot of eggs, can be some problems as animal welfare. So the sea urchin waste is rich with carbonate calcium, so can support as a feed supplement. And we evaluate from economic perspective the sustainability of this new product. When I talk about sustainability, I mean that we consider the three pillars from economic perspective, from environmental and social perspective. And the benefits for the economic, environmental, and social are very high if you are a company that collects sea urchin and you are able also to implement in your supply chain this kind of product.
Actually, what captured my attention was that you also briefly mentioned about these takeaways that companies should take, actually. And I would like to concentrate on that point because traditionally we are also believing that companies are built just for one reason only, profit maximization. But as you have mentioned, circular economy can also provide some other goals or some other maybe activities for the companies that they can be occupied with. So I'd like to ask you, based on your research, what key lessons should companies take, particularly in relation to adopting circular economy models?
The point is that sea urchin belongs to the fishery. The fishery is a quite particular case because unfortunately there is a lot of illegal activities in the fishery because in the case of sea urchin is a very niche market with a high premium price. Also it is difficult to collect because the best option is in scuba diving, so it's very expensive. It depends on weather condition. The other way can create damages for the ecosystem, byproducts, and so on. So starting from this assumption, unfortunately, it's not so easy to collect data and information because companies try to be a little bit greenwashing in this kind of field. But the company that collaborate with this project and they are open in mind, they provide waste and they try to recreate these new eco-friendly products in the medium period, okay, not so long, but in the medium period, they get a lot of benefits in terms of profit, but also in terms of community, because they support also community providing training course, activity in the high school to demonstrate that starting from the waste, it is possible to create some virtuous pathways. Unfortunately, the main issue is that probably when you try to convert your system from a linear to a circular economy, the real gap is the competence, the knowledge inside your company, because it's not so easy. You need to training your employees. At the beginning, it's an investment, okay? So from accounting and management perspective, we know that profit first from a company profile. But yes, but consumer play an important role. If consumer are more oriented in a sustainable direction, they ask a sustainable product, they ask eco-friendly products, look like that company need to follow this new trend. Otherwise, they lost a gap with respect to the other competitors. So in the case of companies that are able to convert this system using circular economy and reuse sea urchin waste, all the three pillars are quite good in terms of money, in terms of environmental benefits, because you reduce waste, and also for the social benefit for the local community, like Sicily and Sardinia area.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I would like to also emphasize that there is this word greenwashing is really popular in the public discourse, and it's really hard to identify for the customers what actually greenwashing composes of. And I think that also discourages the companies in terms of their efforts in the field of circular economy because they are so valuable. And I'm guessing that you are also experiencing that problem in your field.
Sinan, I try to be more simple as possible. Obviously, there is no one single question. It depends on the case, of course, but you can avoid greenwashing to consider the all three pillars of sustainability. For example, you have a tool that is the sustainability reporting. Sustainability reporting is a non-financial disclosure, meaning that you are not focused only on the economic profile and portfolio of the company, but also the environmental and social pillars according to a standard defined by some institution. We have different standards. One of the most important standards are the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, but then we have also the UN standard. There are Italian or other country certification. If you follow this standard, it is quite difficult to obtain the final approval if you are not able to achieve environmental sustainability, social sustainability, because you have to demonstrate that you reduce carbon footprint, that you reduce water use. So it is quite easy to read online. It is also published. So the problem is that it's not mandatory for all companies. There is a regulation, if I remember correctly, in 2014 that force a company to produce sustainability reporting if the size is higher than 500 employees or something similar. But just to give you an idea, so the multinational in general. But look like the case of Italy. Italy is a very small, medium enterprise scenario. So if it is not mandatory, the problem is that you can create some slogan, some motto on the web page with no evidence, no real evidence. You can create on web page, on Instagram, on social media. Yes, we have solar panel, we reduce. Okay, how you can demonstrate, how you can evaluate the real efficiency in terms of sustainability, environmental, and so on. So this is a form of greenwashing, or if it's not called greenwashing, is a way in which, okay, we know that consumers are interested in this, we try to do a simple homework to be cleaner as possible, to create this clean window, but in the reality, is not enough if you have a solar panel or a wind turbines. Yeah. We have to evaluate the whole cycle, the whole materials. So if you put me 2 paragraphs, 2 sentences in the web page, yes, okay. And then this is the point.
I take it as a really important policy recommendation, actually, the certification of these models, circular economy or sustainability. And we should also really expand on this question. And I'd like to move on to the second issue, the relationship between geographical indications and intellectual capital, because you also work on this research topic and you also published a paper, Intellectual Capital for Sustainability, Evidence from Green Patents and Geographical Indications in European Regional Agricultural Systems, published in the Journal of Intellectual Capital in 2025. And in this study, you examine whether the presence of agri-food products protected under geographical indications can enhance the diffusion of green innovation. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with the concept of geographical indications, could you explain what geographical indications are and how they relate to intellectual capital?
Well, geographical indication is a policy tool proposed by European Commission. Was conceived in 1992, so as already anticipated at the beginning of this interview, is quite old instrument, is quite old tool, because in 1992 there were other kind of challenges. So it is a tool that is considered as a sort of traditional tool to protect the production methods, to protect a specific area that produce that specific agri-food product. When we talk about geographical indication, we use a French term like terroir. Terroir is a specific area, maybe composed of some village, some small city, in which there is a specific know-how from a local community with a specific characteristic, pedoclimatic characteristic, in which you can produce that kind of agri-food product or wine product only in that specific designated area. That is a geographical indication, is a sort of label with a stringent regulation, and if you belong to that specific area, you have to follow this stringent regulation. Otherwise, you have no possibility to produce the same product outside of the designated area. So, for example, if I produce Franciacorta wine is an area located from Brescia and Bergamo city in the north of Italy. Maybe you can have similar condition outside from the designated area, for example, 5 kilometers from the limit, but no, you have not the designation of Franciacorta DOCG, that is the label of geographical indication. This is the logic. So it is quite linked to the tradition, to reputation, high product, high value belongs to geographical indication. The most important countries in the sense of the number of geographical indication product are Italy, first France, Spain, a little bit German, and so on. So in general, in the south of Europe, the most important, for example, we can consider for the French wine like Champagne, or for the Italian case, for Parma ham, you produce Parma ham only in the area according to the regulation of Parma ham. There are 3 main categories of geographical indication, but the first 2 most important are PDO and PGI. PDO is protected designation of origin, very stringent regulation. PGI is a protected geographical indication, something similar but with less stringent regulation. In the paper that you mentioned, we try to connect this concept with the intellectual capital. This is the first attempt in the literature, also is a cooperation with other co-authors and my supervisor, because we define intellectual capital as a sort of tangible and intangible assets, specifically not related only to a single company, but to a specific territories, to a specific area, in which there is expertise, networking, consortium, something like that. So it's quite similar to the geographical indication, because when you belong the label of geographical indication, obviously there is a limited number of companies that produce that kind of product under that geographical indication product. And they decide to cooperate together and to create what we call the consortia. Consortia is a place in which you can share idea, you can share data, information. Is a sort of networking. This is an example of intangible asset.
And as you have shown in your paper, there is this relationship between geographical indications and intellectual capital also plays a role in the green innovation. But first, taking a step back, maybe we should also differentiate between conventional innovation and green innovation. So in what ways can geographical indications foster green innovation? Explaining the green innovation first, of course, within the European regional agriculture systems.
Okay, Sinan, thank you for this question. We can stay here for other 3 hours. I'm joking. No, I try to do simple as possible for our listener because this is a huge topic.
Sure.
Obviously, we can simply define innovation as the creation of something new, like, for example, a product or services in the market that try to follow needs that are not covered in the past by other products, for example. There are different kind of innovation. In the literature, we define radical innovation, open innovation, incremental innovation, something that are totally change in the aim and the goals. Maybe you have a product, you totally develop an additional one, so you create, you innovate the process, for example, and you produce an additional product. This is the innovation. Green innovation are more similar, but with the aim to the purpose to reduce emission, to face against climate change, like, for example, solar panel are a green innovation, wind turbines are a green innovation. The point from literature scholars, academic field, is to quantify innovation or green innovation, because it's not easy to find this kind of information. There is not a real database in which you can download innovation, the level of innovation. Yes, you can use research and development investment, something like that, but it's not so easy. So there is a common indicator that is the technologies, the number of technologies and green technologies. And one of these proxy is represented by patent. Why patent? Patent because it's numerically speaking quantitative data. You can download this information. There is a database very important that is RegPat OECD database that cover and collect all the patent application provided by the European Patent Office. And then inside there is a classification in which you can collect patent according to a specific sector, to a specific activity. In our case, we are interested in the agricultural sector. Inside this, there is another classification in which you can select, you can extract green patents. Green patents, according to this definition, are a green technology that are useful to adapt and mitigate to climate change. And we use green patents as a proxy of green technology and so green innovation. This is the only way in which we can quantify this problem, this variable. In our case, why we link geographical indication, that is a form of intellectual capital, and also green innovation. I know it is quite difficult because it's a sort of match between two different players. From one hand, we have geographical indication, the tradition, reputation, terroir, and so on, as we can see before. On the other hand, we have innovation, we have a progress, we have a green innovation, we have a problem. How it can be possible to balance all this scenario? Using econometric stuff, we have no time to go deeper into detail. We found that in Europe there is a polarization. In the south of Europe, there are geographical indication countries, Italy, France, and so on, while the northern countries are more vocated to innovate more. So the technological leader, okay? So this is a polarization. The point is that if you are a laggard region, we define a laggard region as a region that are far from technological frontier, so with a low level of technological frontier. But you have a geographical indication presence that maintains a stringent regulation and so on. If there is an extreme weather event, for example, you need to adapt to these events and you need to introduce an innovation. In that case, you apply directly a green innovation. Why? Because you try to catch the market leader. you try to catch regions that are close to the technological frontier. So paradoxically, because it's not so easy to understand without data to support these results, regions, area that are far from technological level, like for example, southern part of Italy, southern part of Spain and so on, but they are located in territory production of agri-food. In that case, if they innovate directly greener. So the ratio is higher paradoxically in that place instead of in other place in which you have, yes, geographical indication, but a high level of innovation. To catch is a sort of mechanism to cover this gap.
Actually, based on what you have explained and based on your findings in your article, there is a need of change actually in the understanding of these geographical indications, especially in the framework of EU sustainability policymaking and also sustainability agenda. So would you like to concretize more what kind of a change actually is needed in this understanding of geographical indications?
Yeah, there is a quite ambiguity in this because, as you said, the geographical indication was conceived in 1992. So with other topic, with other challenges, I try to be simple, but it's not true. But in 1992, people don't care about climate change, or less than today, of course. So something can change about the European Union. Starting from 2024, there is a sort of improvement in the regulation to include the sustainability perspective in the geographical indication. But now is a voluntary scheme because, for example, consortia in a voluntary base can decide to prepare a sustainability reporting. It's up to the consortia, it's up to the company if they are free to do or not, but something can change. Also in the last decade, and this is another study, that is another working paper, something can change thanks to the amendments, so the changing in the regulation is not too easy because in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of cost, a lot of money to try to change the regulation. You have the approval and all companies inside the consortium, the majority of companies inside the consortium under geographical indication need to be favorable or not to this implementation in the regulation. But these amendments, like for example temporary amendments, are conceived to face, for example, an extreme weather events. So if you have a daily heat storm or, for example, an heat waves, and you reduce your production, of course, what you can do? Or you enlarge the area under protected designation, or you move in a higher level, the latitude and longitude level, to try to reduce, to escape on the weather shock, or you try to implement innovation in the regulation. Because until now, most of these regulation related to the PDO mainly doesn't allow to provide innovation in the system. For example, for the wine, it's not possible to use, for the PDO Italian wine, it's not possible to use drop irrigation. So if you have a hot summer without rainfall, you have no possibility to use infrastructure. This is a problem.
I understand that it's a really delicate and precarious topic to find a really sweet spot between innovation and regulation, and how can we also foster innovation through regulation. I totally agree with that. And moving on to the third topic, the relationship between the weather shocks and how do weather shocks affect economic outcomes, focusing in particular on sectoral labor reallocation in Italy and Europe, because that is the topic of your PhD project. So I would say that I'm really fascinated because it's a really interesting choice of topic, examining the relationship between weather shocks and economic outcomes. That's a novelty. That's an innovation in itself, in a broader sense. So what motivated you to pursue this line of research, and what were the main goals of your project?
Yeah, this is my PhD thesis, so I spent a lot of time, 3 years, day and night, together with my supervisor. Yeah, the first point is that we got with my supervisor this idea reading a newspaper or see the television because, as already anticipated at the beginning of this podcast, we know about the effect of climate change on soil degradation, on citizen human health or something like that. For example, last week in Italy, we experienced dramatically floods that destroy kilometers of cities, people lost their house, but who pay? The question is, who pay this problem? So economically speaking, less is known about this kind of mechanism, and my thesis divided into 3 different directions. The first one, weather shock that affected the labor market, so the job position. Then there is another related field related to the productivity, so we focus on productivity size. And finally, the export. So obviously, if you have a reduction in productivity, who care about export? So you have probably a reduction in export. So we try to investigate these 3 directions, these 3 channels.
Yeah, and I'd like to focus on this relationship between first the climate shocks and labor movements, which in turn leads to important economic consequences. I know that your findings are really broad, and I would like to just ask you maybe the key takeaways from your research, and could you walk us through the process of how climate shocks disrupt the usual patterns of labor reallocation and also productivity in the framework of your research, of course?
Yeah, okay, I try to be simple as possible. For example, in Italy, agriculture play an important role, especially in Mediterranean area. There are some regions that agriculture play around 20% of the revenue for the economic activities, so it's quite important, also in Spain and so on. In that area, also, we have a problem related to the weather shock. Because if you increase the temperature, what happens in terms of productivity and following in terms of workers? So our idea starting from some studies in the literature that focus on developing countries. In developing countries like, for example, India or Southern America area or something like that, but nobody focus on European scenario, where we can define a developed area with a protection, with institution. So we focus on this work. We divide first on Italian case and then the European case, included also in this case Italy. And we consider the 4 main sectors: agricultural activity, industrial activity, services, and construction. And we found that in some part of Europe, especially in Mediterranean area, there was a reduction of productivity, agricultural productivity, if the temperature increased a lot. Above a certain threshold, we have a reduction in productivity. The reduction in productivity, of course, provoke a reduction in the salary of workers, and a lot of workers are not necessary, because if you produce less, of course, you need less workforce. What happens about these employees? Who talk about this situation? So the point is that we see that a sort of reallocation from the most affected sector to the less affected sector. The most affected sector is agriculture first, and then construction, because they are outside sector activities, very detrimental, especially in summer, where you can achieve 36 Celsius degree, but you have to work because maybe it's harvesting period. There is no air condition, so there is a human health problem, but also in terms of workforce. So there is a reallocation from, for example, agricultural activity to services activity. Services seems to be a sort of absorptive capacity of this workforce. Obviously, there are some problems. There are market friction, there are expertise, because it's not an automatically process that you move from one season to another season, from one sector to another sector. It's depend on training course, it's depending on skills, it's depending on the funding provided, the subsidy provided by the government, and so on. There is also a problem related to illegal activities, illegal workforce in agricultural sector. So it's not so easy to quantify, but the dynamic is that, okay, it is possible to obtain this movement from agriculture to services sector, and this is taking force. It's quite good because it's a sort of reallocation. It's a sort of, we talk about labor reallocation because it's a sort of adaptation strategy to reduce the negative consequence of this climate effect on labor market. Other people remain unemployment. We focus that the unemployment share increase a lot, so this is a problem related to the weather shock. Quite interestingly, but it is quite easy also to understand, this effect is in some part totally different in the other part of Europe. In the northern part of Europe, for example, the workforce in agriculture and the productivity in agriculture increase. Why, Sinan? I ask you.
Because the temperature increases, and that also creates the diversity in terms of the agricultural products, I guess.
Yes, it is a simple answer. Yes, we demonstrate using statistical and econometric tools Of course, because now it is possible to produce something new with respect to the past, because the temperature increased 1 degree, 2 degree with respect to 30 years ago. I provide you an example. I'm a wine lover, so probably you drink in some part of your life some champagne. Is a sparkling wine, is the most probably famous French wine and also wine all over the world. Now, starting from post-COVID area, it is possible to produce something similar, not the same for the geographical indication reason, but something similar in the southern part of England, because the condition change.
That's amazing.
So a lot of French winery company try to invest in the land close to London because they produce with the same or similar grape variety, obviously not the product because it's protected by designation, but with a similar organoleptic characteristics. This is climate change.
Actually, it's amazing to learn about this effects, these unanticipated effects of the climate change, especially in this context. And you have also worked on this export goods, especially in the framework of the wine export performance in this context. And I'm amazed by the fact that climate change has all kinds of effects in every parts of our lives. And I'm really grateful that you have explained, you shed a light actually on these aspects. And we have talked about 3 different topics in the framework of this environmental economics. And this field is an extremely interdisciplinary field. Yeah. Which requires both subject matter knowledge and also methodological expertise in economics and environmental politics. So I'd like to ask a methodological question actually. So what methodological challenges do you encounter in this kind of interdisciplinary research? And to develop a thorough understanding of these issues in this field, what do you think should be researchers' toolbox, both from economics and also from the environmental science?
Well, the point is that I spend a lot of time to learn about statistics, econometric stuff, software, the use of software and the data science, data management, and to collecting this data. I know that I have a lot of colleagues that produce qualitative studies. You can create a top journal, top paper using a qualitative approach. But it is in this field important to implement quantitative analysis because without data you are not able to understand the real world, to quantify, because the point is quantify the damages, the risk, the impact. To do this, you have to step by step, day to day, because now with respect to 5 years ago, so not long time, we have different sources that are available, continuously available. So you have to spend time to be on the frontier in academic speaking, because if you are able to collect first that kind of data, to download, to manage that kind of data, you can create a sort of niche market in your academic profile. So this is very important. So it's necessary to use software. It's necessary to use data. In my case, I spend a lot of time using and collecting weather data from Copernicus, that is most famous bank for the forecasting weather and so on. I'm working on daily data, so I reconstruct panel data from 1980, also hourly data, so it requires a lot of time, a lot of competence. And if you are familiar with this topic, when you create the data set with this information, you try to not to publish this kind of data set because you know how long it requires. So it is a competence, it's a skills that you improve. And also your colleagues ask you help to include in the paper, in the article, because it is important to manage this kind of data. It is important to have in the department someone who is familiar with this kind of data. So this is a challenge, this is a task, but we are working. And then when you talk about multidisciplinary, there is a positive, of course, perspective, because first, you can create something new with the different competence, so you can also go outside from your field. Also, you can share idea. There is also a friendship in our department. Here in Heidelberg, I'm with my supervisor that is an accounting and business professor, but also with another University of Milan professor related to biologist field. So I'm trying to learn something related to the biologists, and professor, in this case, Professor Parolini, try to learn something about business models, so we can keep in touch each other. And this is very important. Obviously, the point is that you have to find a common language, common methods because, of course, the database are totally different, the competence are totally different, and also in the scholarly speaking, also the target, the journal are different, so you have to balance. And for that reason, it is quite often to find the new journal that are multidisciplinary journal. In some case, they are well seen. In other part, there is a little bit negative position about multidisciplinary journal. I believe now is an opportunity, but of course it depends on the case, it depends on the mentality, because in some case there are some professors that decide and prefer to stay specifically in that topic. I have the opportunity to collaborate with open mind professor and supervisor that during these 4 or 5 years keep in touch each other to exchange also competence.
And also you have brought your experience in this interdisciplinary work to Collegio Futuro, Interdisciplinary College for Doctoral Students 2026. So maybe is it fair to say that your experiences are validated with what you have seen actually between these exchange from doctoral students coming from different disciplines? So what are your observations in working with many different doctoral students coming from different fields?
I believe it's a very great opportunity. This is the first time that I'm here in Heidelberg, but Collegio Futuro, if I remember well, is the 4th edition now. So my supervisor asked me to present and to be here in person to try to connect something that at the beginning is very difficult to connect. So in our case, our workshop focus on soil degradation. And we have to combine soil degradation with a sustainable business model. This is the task of these days during the workshop. And also, master degree students or PhD students that attend this workshop have a very different background. We have an expert of PFAS, an expert of penguins, an expert of, a chemical aspect. So it's quite challenging, but if you have the chance to improve your expertise, to go also further in the mind, you are able to listen, to take some inspiration, some notes. I believe the result, we don't know. We will see this Friday when they discuss the final policy brief. That is the conclusion of this experience. But I believe there are some good feelings. So I'm happy to demonstrate how it is possible to implement soil degradation using a sustainable business model. Because if you are a company and you produce, for example, I don't know the name, but you produce a chemical products and you create for the local community a damages because you pollute water to clean your machinery, your equipment, and so on, of course, you can create a damages not only environmental speaking, but also for the social speaking. And when you create a sustainable business model is a tool that takes into consideration also this aspect. Because it is important, of course, the reputation, what public opinion think about that specific company, that specific institution, buildings, or other examples. So in this case, soil degradation can be considered for the company or other level perspective.
Actually, it's also relieving to hear that professors themselves are also having their challenges, having their hard times working in an interdisciplinary field, especially in this context of communication maybe. So if you are working in an interdisciplinary field or if you are aspiring to work actually in such an interdisciplinary manner, please don't afraid. Everyone has their challenges. And we are also looking forward to see what comes out of this workshop, Collegio Futuro, in the future. And thank you so much for this informative interview, wonderful interview. And traditionally, I ask our guests one personal question. And in your case, I'd like to ask you, would you like to share your future research plans and the specific topics you hope to contribute to more in academia? Or do you have this feeling of there are many gaps in the field of environmental economics that should be more concentrated on?
Yeah, about research, as you probably understood, I'm a wine lover and also a sommelier. So I attended the whole course of sommelier because in Italy it is very important. So I'm quite interested to continue in the wine economics field. We have other papers that evaluate the economic impact of climate change in terms of profit, in terms of revenue for a company. So we map Italian winery canteen and company, and we demonstrate that climate change reduce the profit. And also we create a projection for the future to create a sort of agenda in which company can protect itself from these weather shocks. So I'd like to continue. This is an example, of course. Then my supervisor told me that we are organizing again the Collegio Futuro for 2027. So probably we can keep in touch the following year. About myself, yes, in Italy it is quite complicated now, the situation, because now I'm a postdoc position, but it's a temporary position, is related to a specific project, to a specific period in time. Fortunately, there is a budget constraint for all Italian institute and universities, so it's a sort of resilience, it's a sort of surviving period. I try to do my best because I spend a lot of time, energy, first as a bachelor, then master, then PhD, but also our listeners that are in the PhD position, especially in some countries in which the situation is not so easy. I suggest you to try to go again to further to believe in this because it is very beautiful, not only to do research. We talk about research, but the first mission for me, for the university, is to provide information and lecture to our students. The target is students. It is important to well prepare the lecture, to help during the thesis, not to escape, because it is quite horrible when students send an email to the professor and professor waiting 2 weeks' time to reply. Because I'm quite young, so I have also the knowledge about ex-students. So for me, it is very important to balance research activity, but also a sort of professor. I'm not a professor, but a teaching assistant activity. So this is the first mission. And if I'm imagining the future, I imagine all in the university. I have no B plan. So I hope in some case, I hope to stay in this field because I'm really motivated and also happy with this environment. And also I have the opportunity to create connection and a real relationship with my colleagues.
Actually, we are also grateful to you that you have accepted our offer to share your knowledge, share your insights within this podcast series. And what you have explained is really, really important. Provide information to students. It's something that we need actually in these times. And our science communication project is also trying to serve this project. That's also one of the aspects that I'd like to emphasize. And the second aspect is that I'm really happy to hear that you have this opportunity to combine your hobby and also academic research when it comes to wine.
Exactly.
Which is a really wonderful area to explore, I guess. So thank you so much again for your insights. And if you liked our episode, please don't forget to check our latest episodes. And Professor Zilia and I are saying goodbye to you.
Goodbye, and thank you, Sinan, for this amazing opportunity. All the best for your podcast.
Thank you so much, Professor. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the HGGS podcast series, Ascendem. In this series, we bring you conversations with experts from a wide range of disciplines, from the social sciences to the humanities, from law to economics. If you enjoyed our podcast, we invite you to explore our previous episodes and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new episode. Stay tuned for more insightful interviews coming soon.